Perfect. Excellent timing, Hannah. So as always, we will be recording this session so that we can later post it on YouTube and reach a wider audience or anyone who wasn't able to make it today. To start off, I'd like to welcome you to the second to last ELK workshop. We're creating an eco-living kitchen. We're really excited to have you all join us and to have our presenter, Lindsay, here. Lindsay's also been supporting us through this whole process through her role in co-creating a sustainable BC. So it's nice to have you join us for this part as well, Lindsay. Awesome. So we're going to do with a brief introduction. I know lots of you have heard it many times before, but just for any newcomers, we'll go through it again. We will have Lindsay do the presentation, and then we're going to have discussion questions and a brief conclusion where we'll spin the wheel of names to select this week's prize winner. Awesome. So I'd like to acknowledge that myself and my fellow ELK team members are located on the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Lheidli, and we're very happy to live, work, and play on these lands. If you know the territory that you are on, please acknowledge it in the chat. If you don't know, go to nativeland.ca and look it up. It's .ca, but it also has Indigenous territories from around the world. So it's a really cool resource if you want to know where you're at. So we are creating an eco-living kitchen, or ELK to our friends, those who know us well. We're a group of university students who, through funding by the Fraser Basin, created this initiative and are trying to address kitchen waste in the Prince George region. My name's Helga. I'm a non-binary person. I use all different kinds of pronouns. I often use they, them with ELK to make other people feel more comfortable doing the same, but I use everything, so no worries about that. I'm a forestry and conservation student, so I like conflict. And I joined ELK because I really wanted to make an impact on the community any way that I could, and so that I could network with like-minded students. And boy, have I met some neat people. So I think we'll go to Shauna next because she's in the camera row.
Awesome. Thanks, Helga. So hi, everyone. I'm Shauna. I use she, her pronouns. Also a university student at UMBC, as Helga said. I'm doing a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental and Sustainability Studies, and I really got into this because I'm originally from Calgary, and this was a really great opportunity to actually get involved in the Prince George community and as well meet some really awesome folks, which has definitely been achieved through this initiative. So yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us today, and I'll pass it over to Anne.
Thank you, Shauna. My name is Anne, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm also a student at UNBC, and I'm doing my master's in natural resources and environmental science. And like everybody else here, I came into the ELK initiative because I really wanted to meet some really like-minded, awesome, passionate people about environmental sustainability and who cares about climate action. So yeah, that's me. So finally, last but not least, let's go to Hannah.
Everyone, I'm Hannah. I also go to UMBC, and I'm also in an environmental and sustainability studies degree program. I joined ELK because I really liked the idea of being able to apply what I'm learning in my degree program to real world situations, and I really liked that I was also able to apply it to the community that I'm currently live in. So we'll go back to Helga.
Thanks, guys. All right, so workshop structure. As you know, this workshop is an open space for sharing what we know and what we don't know. And none of us are true masters or, ultimate knowledge holders of any one thing. So we're always open to learning new things, but we want to create a space where you feel comfortable asking questions and potentially answering questions as well. So inclusive, collaborative, and kind are really the three words that we need to focus on. And then there are quite a few folks in our workshop today, so we're not going to go into the who are you bit, but please feel free to reflect on what brought you to this workshop. What are the things that really attracted you to this program? And if you feel like letting us know in the chat or in this feedback survey later on, that would be awesome. I also would like to apologize for my forest hair. I was tramping around in the forest a little bit, so I look a little bit disheveled. Awesome. And from here, we're going to turn it over to Lindsay. Lindsay can throw up her slides and then give us a bit of an introduction. We'll head right into it.
Thanks, Helga. All right, so yeah, I'll just give you a brief intro before I share my slides. My name is Lindsay Sackett. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the Fraser Basin Council, and I was lucky enough to, like Helga said, be a supportive role for ELK through the Co-Creating a Sustainable BC initiative this year in Prince George. Today, I won't be really be wearing my FBC hat though. I'll be wearing my fermentation enthusiast hat. And I'll just be guiding you through a little workshop on how to basically the basics of food fermentation and specifically how to make sauerkraut. So without further ado, let me just share my screen. All right, hopefully everyone can see that okay. So let's go here. So I thought I would get into kind of a little bit of a background in fermentation before we get into the actual workshop, just so people can understand how the process works. So fermentation is really great for a lot of reasons. It's a great tool to have on hand, so you can use it when, you know, maybe you have some extra cabbage or other vegetables that you might not be able to use before they're going to go bad. And it's also fermented food products are great for your gut health, so it's a health food as well. So for those reasons, fermentation has been used for thousands of years to preserve food, to increase shelf life, and to prevent food spoilage. So how fermentation does this is the process uses lactic acid to preserve food. When vegetables are placed into an anaerobic environment, meaning they don't have exposure to air, lactobacillus, which is a bacteria that's present on a lot of vegetables, it begins to flourish and it starts to outnumber the bad bacteria that would otherwise cause food to rot or become spoiled. So this lactobacillus produces lactic acid under this anaerobic environment where it is growing and metabolizing carbs and starches that are present in the vegetables. And that lactic acid is what gives fermented foods that sour or tangy flavor that we all might be familiar with. So adding salt to ferments is also another way to really aid the preservation process, because like lactic acid, it's antimicrobial and it inhibits the growth of bad bacteria. So that's just kind of a brief, very brief little intro to vegetable fermentation. There's tons of resources on the internet if you wanted to learn more, but we'll also be providing you with a couple of things to check out if you wanted to explore fermentation further. So without further ado, we can start our workshop. I'll just go into what we need to make this sauerkraut. So if you're living in Prince George, you likely would have received a kit, and that kit will contain a large mason jar, a teeny mason jar, an airlock lid, 1 cabbage, and 1 carrot. But in addition to those things, you're also going to need about 3 tablespoons of salt. A little more, a little less is okay. Additional seasonings that you can add. These are entirely optional though. So some good ones you might want to use are garlic or caraway or mustard seeds. You'll also need a very large bowl, a cutting board and a knife, or a mandolin. It's up to you. I tried to use my mandolin and it didn't really work out because it's a crappy mandolin. So I would just go with the cutting board and a knife if you've got those handy. Measuring spoons, a nice decently sized wooden spoon, a pestle, which is optional but helpful. And very importantly, you want to have clean hands. I guess we can take if anyone's following along, we can take a couple minutes to grab some items. What do you guys think, team? Okay, sounds good. So I'll just turn off my computer and hop over to my little setup where I'm going to demonstrate the workshop, and we'll reconvene in about 3-4 minutes, and we can get started on the workshop. Feel free to grab anything that you'll need.
Thanks, Lindsay. So let's come back at 3:15.
So I just saw in the chat, someone said they don't have fermentation weights. I'll get into this a little bit later, but your teeny tiny mason jar will also act as your fermentation weight. Whoever is the host of the meeting, do you want to pin my little workshop video here so it's in the center of the screen for everyone? Or spotlight, I guess, not pin. Thanks. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Just making sure tech is working properly.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. All right, so we can get started. So first things first, like I mentioned earlier, you definitely want to make sure that you have clean hands. So step one is going to be to wash your hands and wash the outside of your, or wash your fermentation weight or your teeny little mason jar that you were provided with. Okay. So first thing first, let's cut this cabbage in half. So I like to take off the outer leaves just because sometimes they're a bit icky and, you know, they're rolling around in the grocery store and whatever. So we can take those off. You can throw them in the composter or you give them a rinse and throw them in your freezer and use them for vegetable stock later on. And then we want to cut this in half. Like that. And next you want to remove the core. So, I mean, you could leave it in, but it doesn't have that same edible texture as the rest of the cabbage. So just removing it makes it a little bit more pleasant. So if you just cut it in a nice little triangle here, not gonna look perfect, but you just want to get that hard bit out. I apologize for the wobbly table. Okay. So you can just compost those. And next you want to slice your cabbage into thin strips. So you want to go pretty thin here, just because this is the size and the texture that you're going to be eating when you finally eat your sauerkraut. So you want it to be in, you know, thin little edible bite-sized strips. So you can just cut it, you know, around here. Thin little strips like this. And you just go through the whole cabbage, maybe slice it widthwise a few times. And that is that. So eventually you're going to end up with a big bowl of cabbage like this. Once you have that, you want to grate your carrot and set that aside. That's what I have here. Now the carrot is pretty optional. I like to add carrot just because it gives it a nice little pop of color and a little bit of flavor, and also the yes, the magic of the video. The sugars in the carrot help to speed up the fermentation process a little bit, but it's entirely up to you. I just like to add the carrot. So you want to have that and set that aside. Next, you want to measure your salt. So we're going to measure out about 3 tablespoons of salt. The rule of thumb is to use about 3 tablespoons of salt per 5-pound cabbage. If your cabbage, just to answer the question in the chat here, I didn't peel the carrot, I just washed it, but it's entirely up to you. If you leave the skin on, especially if it's an organic carrot, you get a little bit of that natural B12, but yeah, it's personal preference really. Just give it a good rinse. So yeah, back to the salt. The salt, your rule of thumb is to use 3 tablespoons per 5-pound cabbage. If your cabbage is a bit small, like under 2 pounds, I would say use less, maybe about 2 tablespoons. But for everyone that received a kit today, 3 tablespoons should be a good amount. They're all pretty normal size cabbages. All right, so we're going to measure out our salt. 1, 2, oh, here, let's adjust the video here. There we go. And 3. Like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be spot on. It's just around 3 tablespoons of cabbage or salt. So you're going to throw that in there with the cabbage. And once you have this all together, your next step is going to massage the cabbage with the salt. This you want to have clean hands for, and in my opinion, it's a pretty like gross feeling to have the salt on your hands, but it'll get better as you go. So what's going to happen, you're just going to give this a massage, and it will take some time, but you just want to work in the salt until your cabbage starts to break down and soften. And what's going to happen is it's going to release the water from inside the cabbage. So you're going to get like a juice forming at the bottom, and that juice is going to be our brine that we use to trap the cabbage in the bowl and create that anaerobic environment that we need to have the fermentation take place. So this is a pretty, as I said, a little bit of a tedious process. So, and I guess we did just take a break, so y'all just have to bear with me and watch me massage this cabbage.
I think if people are following along at home, this is a good chance for them to catch up with the chopping and stuff. So
that's true.
No worries.
How's my sound? Sound okay, even with all this squishing?
I can hear you well. Yeah.
Okay, good. So yeah, if you were doing this kind of on your own time and you had all your stuff already chopped, what you could do is once you give this a massage, you could let it sit for 5, 10, 15 minutes. Cabbage ASMR, yes. And that will help kind of draw out the juices. So you don't have to massage the entire time. I was planning on having a cabbage pre-massaged for us, but I figured that would be a lot of sauerkraut I was going to end up with. So once the juices start to come out, you'll see it at the bottom. It's kind of hard for me to show you because it's all the way at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it there, but you can definitely feel it. So your next step is going to be to add your carrot and any of your spices that you were planning to use. I'm just going to give my hands a quick rinse. Bear with me. So if you are adding spices, you just want to keep note of the fact that fermentation intensifies anything that you add to your ferments. So if you add garlic or anything strong like that, you definitely want to use a little bit. I'd say for a jar like this, maybe about a teaspoon, unless you are looking for a really, really strong flavor. You can always, experiment and add more in your next time, but just to be safe, start small. So once you've added your spices and your carrot, optional spices, you just want to start massaging that again. As you're massaging, you kind of give it a squeeze. All right, so I think mine's just about ready. Give my hands another rinse, and then we'll move to the next step. Okay, so your next step is going to be to take your large mason jar. It doesn't have to be a mason jar, but with the airlock lids that we gave you, these work, that's what they're designed for. So I'm going to take the lid off, and we're just going to spoon in that cabbage mixture. Making a mess. Another thing I forgot to mention is that you're going to want to have some sort of plate for the end, just to mitigate any spillage. But it's a lot of cabbage to fit in here, so you want to pack it down as you go. Like, don't fill it up first and then pack it down. You want to really pack it as you go. And that will help push out any of the air bubbles, because we don't want air bubbles. And it'll help you get as much of that sauerkraut in your jar as possible.
We've got a question in the chat, Lindsay.
Yeah.
It's from Elizabeth, and she says, if using caraway, how much should be added?
I would go with about a teaspoon. 1 to 2 teaspoons, depending on how strong you want the caraway flavor. Personally, I've never used caraway. I don't think I've ever even had caraway in a sauerkraut, but I know that is a very popular choice. But yeah, anything you want to just add a small amount. All right, yeah, I don't know if you can see it, but that juice is already starting to form, even just in the jar here. And you don't want to fill it up too much. I would say fill it up probably to about this, where it starts to taper. If you're using a mason jar, you want to leave some room, A, for the fermentation weight, and B, for the brine. The brine will kind of bubble out and expand, so you don't want it to be too full. All right. Apologize if you can hear the sirens in the background. All right, so we're going to top that all off with our brine. I didn't quite fit all of my kraut in there. And here's where you'd want to take out your pestle, if you have one. And really push that down. So you want to push it down so the brine is on top, covering the cabbage. Obviously, there's going to be little floater pieces, but you want to just get it down as far as you can. So that will work. Sorry, my cat is also eating. She's chewing pretty loudly. I don't know if you can hear her there. All right. So next step is to take your little mason jar here, or fermentation weight. You want to remove the lid. I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't know if the lid would be a good idea to mix with the brine, just because it's metal. It might cause it to rust, but I think I saw in the chat earlier that others have used it with success. And you're going to take your little jar and you're just going to place it directly on top and use it to push down that sauerkraut and keep it under the brine. Depending on how juicy your cabbage is, this might cause some spillage, so just be mindful of that. One second here. So next, you're going to take your airlock. This isn't entirely necessary. It is very helpful though. If you're not using an airlock, you could use some really dense cheesecloth perhaps, if you know it's not going to overflow, or you could just make sure to burp your glass every day. I wouldn't recommend this just because it's it's easy to forget and your jar may explode. So yeah, these I just got on Amazon. I'm sure you can get them other places as well. They're really easy to clean. And so what it is, it's kind of like a one-way door. So it allows gas to escape that's being created by the fermentation process, but it keeps other things like bugs and dust and debris out. So you're going to place your fermentation, your airlock in the lid there, and place that on top. And there you have it. You just want to put that on the plate and put that somewhere dark. A cupboard is great just because it's out of the way and it's going to be a little bit protected from fruit flies and things like that. So I will just turn off my camera here. All right, so once you've got your jar tightly closed in a nice dark, undisturbed place, you want to leave that for about a week, but I would still check on it once a day, especially if you're new to the process. You might see a bit of a white film forming on top. That's just yeast. It won't hurt you, but a lot of people would rather not eat it, so you can just scrape it off before you finish the fermenting. And just make sure you use a clean spoon. But what you're looking for as problems is, yes, like in the chat, pink or any sort of colorful growth, or also any kind of like fuzzy mold, anything like that. Unfortunately, that means your ferment, something went awry and you'll probably have to throw it out and start over again. That's kind of why doing it with clean hands and clean utensils is very important. So yeah, keep an eye out for those type of things, but a little bit of white yeast is no big deal and pretty normal. So you're gonna wanna check on it every day just to keep out for those things, but I wouldn't taste it till about a week in. You can taste it a week in and see what it tastes like, if you like it. How fast that happens depends on the temperature of your house. So the warmer your house is, the speedier your fermentation will happen. I believe the ideal temperature is, typical household temperature in between 60 and 75 degrees. Anything warmer than 75 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to start to get that, like a lot of that yeasty buildup and like potential for more weird growth. So yeah, in and around ideal room temperature is great for fermenting. But yeah, anything colder than that, like if you keep it in your cellar or something, it's going to go a lot slower. It'll still happen, just a lot slower. So usually for me, it takes around 2 weeks for a good sauerkraut, a good tasting sauerkraut. Once it tastes good to you. Also, sorry, side note, when you're tasting it, make sure you use a clean fork and don't double dip because you don't want to be introducing any of your mouth bacteria into the fermentation. So yeah, once it tastes good to you, maybe at around 2 weeks, all you have to do is replace the lid with a sealed lid and just pop it in the fridge. The fridge will really like drastically slow down the fermentation process. It won't entirely halt it. I know with things like kombucha, if you leave it in the fridge for too long, it is still gradually fermenting and there is the potential for it to explode in your fridge. It would have to be there for like a year, I'm sure. But yeah.
It really depends on the kombucha.
Yeah, also if it's a really sugary one. So yeah, that's that. That's fermenting. It's like a very basic thing to start with. Like I said, really easy, minimal effort, minimal ingredients, and tastes delicious and very good for you. So like I said, we're going to be sending out a couple of resources if you want to explore fermentation further. And I hope you guys learned something.
Awesome. Thank you, Lindsay. I think we're going to open it up to some questions from the chat now or through Mike, however people want to ask their questions. I actually have a question. And that is, I know you mentioned that the carrot speeds up the process because of the sugars, right? And that's really similar to when you're working with other bacteria and yeasts. They love that stuff. But what happens if you really drastically shift the ratio of carrot to cabbage? Do you know? Because some people, not me, I'll disclaim, but some people don't like cabbage very much. So I'm wondering if you could make a really carrot heavy ferment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never done it, but I assume it would take a bit less time just because of the added sugar, and it would probably taste different, like not as similar to sauerkraut because carrot is a different taste, right? I know kimchi has a lot of carrot in it, or can have a lot of carrot in it, and people do fermented beets. So yeah, I'm sure you could definitely change up the ratios, but I think my advice would just be to keep an eye on it. I just see a question in the chat there. The small jar will catch the brine later when the mixture expands. It can, yes. There is potential for it to overflow, hence the plate. But yeah, that is the idea, that it'll just seep into there gradually and it won't burst through the top. I see in the chat someone added, Margaret, that you do water kefir. I used to do that too, and my little grains, I doubt they're still alive, but that's cool that you do that.
I have a question, Lindsay.
Yeah.
So is kimchi the same principle as well as just different spices?
Yeah,
Okay.
for sure. It's the same thing. It's like you have to have that. I think it's called gochujang, but I could be pronouncing it incorrectly. That's like the chili spice that is used. And then there's usually a pretty standard set of vegetables, like Napa cabbage, carrot, sometimes a little bit of Granny Smith apple, and radishes, daikon radishes. Really tasty, but yeah, same process.
Cool, thanks. I'll try it out maybe.
Yeah, go for it.
Superstore always has lots
No
of
way.
gochujang
Okay.
and daikon. So yeah, so if you want to make
Good
it,
to
they've got the
know.
stuff. And the Marquee downtown also sells gochujang, but he also sometimes brings in Napa cabbage. So if you send him a message on Facebook, especially in the summer, he'll bring it in from the markets down in Vancouver.
Oh, that's
You
awesome.
can get your hands on it.
Yeah, it is pretty hard to find Napa cabbage. So that's good to know. What would you suggest another quick ferment recipe be? Pickles. Yeah, I mean, I've never done pickles, but pickles, I don't know how quick they are. There's not really much sugar in it, so I think it would probably take a bit of time, but definitely probably easy as long as you get the right spice blend. Another really quick one is fermented chili sauce. There's a really good Portuguese one. I can't remember the name. I think it's like pimenta moida or something. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, which I probably am. But basically what you do is you take chilies. I've used like hot Portugal peppers, and remove the seeds or leave them in if you like really hot things. And you just mix it with a ton of salt, and put it in a blender or a food processor, and just let it sit covered for like 3 days until it stops bubbling, and add a little bit of vinegar for that tanginess and that extra like preservation, and bam, you got some fermented hot sauce. Anybody have any other questions?
I'll jump in with one. So In talking about reducing kitchen waste, like why do you see, or how do you see fermenting food being a solution to that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a solution, but 100% a good tool. Um, Mostly just because, especially if you have a garden and you have excess things already at once, it's a good way to have those things on hand for longer months into the winter, as opposed to just having to give them away and have them all be eaten as fresh. Yeah, so extending the life of food and saving things that maybe you bought too much of and you're like, oh no, it's gonna go bad. You can just mix it with some salt and ferment it.
Awesome. Yeah, I know.
Also, oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
it's all right. Go ahead.
Like with things like kombucha, it's not really, you have to buy the things to make it. It's not really like a thing that you would use or you would make from scraps or anything like that. But if you're using it as a replacement for soda or pop, you're cutting a huge amount of packaging there. So there's that facet as well.
I have another question. So, is there anything that you wouldn't recommend fermenting, or can you ferment anything? Like, for example, I know you can make salted eggs and things like that, but can you ferment meat or fish? Is that possible?
I think you can. I have no knowledge on it, unfortunately. But yeah, if you can ferment eggs, I think you can probably ferment meat. Maybe not ferment it, but you can cure it with salt or smoke, like jerky, things like that. I'm not too sure though about the fermentation of meat. I'll have to get back to you on that. Can you reduce the salt on future batches if you inoculate with leftover brine? Ooh, good question. Probably. I've never tried that, but that's a good suggestion. Yeah, if you think your brine still smells good and it's been kept kind of sanitary, I'd definitely give that a try. However, the salt, I don't think you can completely eliminate it, just because the salt does help facilitate the kind of breakdown of the vegetables, but something to try for sure. Okay, some comments in the chat here about fermenting meat. Cool. Fermented herring. I actually think I might have had that before a long time ago.
Before we went plant-based, pickled herring was always like the Christmas food.
Yeah, yeah.
Fermented herring and beet salad is a fine European Scandinavian tradition. Very tasty too.
Mm.
On the kombucha note, you're right that you have to often buy the supplies, but if you buy a kombucha that you really dislike, like from the store, you can use that kombucha to make your own SCOBY. So you don't have to go out and purchase a SCOBY because they're often really expensive. So you can use store-bought kombucha to make your own. That's how I got mine, and I now have like 24 SCOBYs all living in jars. Slight problem, but yeah. So you can use like old kombucha to make more SCOBY mothers.
Yep, that's a very good point. I've never bought a SCOBY. I've only ever made them with kombucha. I don't know though. I think you have to use unflavored kombucha. I could be wrong about that though.
I've heard this too, or at least it has to be a really, yeah, because flavors are added in the secondary fermentation process. So I think the yeast aren't quite as strong if you have that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it would still work though. Like I've made kombucha and flavored it, and once it's gone through its second fermentation, it has that little kind of jelly SCOBY at the top of the bottle. So you must still be able to do it. It might just take longer.
Try it out, folks, and get back to us.
Yeah.
We have some kombucha fans in the chat.
Nice. Yeah, kombucha is great. I feel your pain, Helga, about having too many SCOBYs. You know, you don't want to throw them out. because you grew them. They're like your little babies. Yeah, I just have mine sitting in my fermenter, but I've definitely got to break them up. They're getting pretty thick.
And when you see them grow, you're aware of how alive they are, right? Like you can watch basically how they're born. And so there's definitely an emotional and sort of ethical dilemma that you get into there. I was musing on the fact that when we did our composting workshop 2 weeks ago, we were talking about how to prevent those anaerobic bacteria, right? And to keep them out of your compost because you really want the aerobic ones to be in there. And in this case, we're working with the opposite situation and trying to encourage a different type of bacteria. And so it's really cool to me because we ignore bacteria a lot and we think of them as very bad. And yet already in our culture, we work together with a lot of bacteria who help us out a lot. So I just like to think about that because, the bacteria are working hard.
For sure, we can't discount bacteria. They're an essential part of our life, whether we like it or not. Oh, some notes on scobies. Lots of people talk about carving them into pieces. Interesting. Dehydrated into gummy probiotics. Ooh, I'll have to look into that. That sounds really gross. But anything for health. My dog will eat anything, so she would definitely eat or a SCOBY. She's probably just think it was chicken or something. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't think so, but I am not a fermentation expert, so I couldn't tell you. I've only ever done it with salt. I think you could definitely reduce the salt though, that's for sure. Sorry, that was just answering the question. I don't know if everyone saw it in the chat. Is there anything else that can be used to replace salt for people who don't consume it? Yep, Himalayan salt would be totally fine. A little more expensive, but definitely fine. Yeah, and this might be something to look into as well. I'm not sure if the salt is somehow broken down at all during the fermentation process. I know that happens with the sugars, like in kombucha. When you're making kombucha, it feels like you're adding so much sugar. But the bacteria and the yeast consume it / break it down. So it ends up not really being that much sugar. I don't know. I don't know if the same process would happen to salt, but yeah, like you said, it's not a huge amount over a whole batch. Right, that's true. The salt probably stays. Thank you, Margaret. So I think if you used vinegar, it would be more of a quick pickle as opposed to a true fermentation. personally, I'm not a huge fan of those. I feel like they are very vinegary and always like leave me feeling with that like really tart feeling in my mouth. But if you're into that, that's definitely a quicker way to go. But you wouldn't get the same probiotic health benefits.
I have one last question, Lindsay. And it's about pickle juice. So I have a bunch of pickle juice and I don't know what to do with it. And I don't want to throw it away. Is there anything I could do with it? Pickle something else with it, maybe?
Maybe. I mean, it depends what kind of pickles it was. If it's just your standard grocery store, Bix or whatever it is, pickles, you could potentially like use that to flavor things. I don't know if it would work for actual pickling, just because they have a lot of processes they go through in the manufacturing process that we don't know about. But if it's fermented, like real pickles, yeah, I would give that a go for sure. But you could definitely use it for flavoring, like throwing it in cocktails, like Caesars or Bloody Marys, or things like that.
Thanks.
Find someone that likes to drink pickle juice.
That's a thing.
What?
Somehow. Oh, Elizabeth has a good point. You can marinate meats with pickle juice or boil up some veggies in it for quick pickles. There you go.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
I've just been digging into the salt question, because I know it's not the salt doesn't really preserve it, right? It's the acid produced by the bacteria. But the salt, because of the water leaving the vegetable, the salt is what makes it crispy. And so if you were to try and preserve with just vinegar, which might not quite work, and like you say, it's more of a quick pickle, it's also harder to get that really crispy texture. So sometimes even when I make quick pickles at home with just vinegar and like a cucumber, Asian style with some shichimi togarashi, then I still throw the salt in because that's what draws the water out of the cucumber and gives it the crunch that we like in pickles, right? So you might be able to make it with just vinegar, but it would be kind of saggy and sad.
Good to know.
Anybody else have any questions for Lindsay, or perhaps a story about your own fermenting journey, if you would like to share that as well? Be interesting to hear, or turn on your mic and share aloud as well.
I did have a question about burping. If you didn't have an airlock lid, is like there a certain method of doing it, or do you just open it and then like close it again, or does it have to like, do you crack it a bit, or how does that work?
The airlock lid?
Without the airlock lid, like if you didn't have one.
Without the airlock lid. Yeah, so you would have to burp it. So what you do, you just open the jar like once a day to release that excess gas, and then just close it back up again. It'll still ferment. It's a lot more high maintenance. They have really fancy airlock lids that I'm sure you can look them up on the internet. They have like this whole like water process, and like nothing is getting in there, like no flies, no nothing. But the ones that we just use now, they're a little bit less high tech, but I think they're a lot easier to clean, a lot less high maintenance. With things like kombucha and probably even with like sauerkraut and those vegetable ferments. You can also use like really like a thicker cloth that will not allow bugs or dust, and just kind of put it over top. That will work too. But I would only be hesitant to use the cloth with vegetable ferments, because sometimes the brine like spills over and you wouldn't want it to get all soggy and potentially moldy. So as long as you're sure that that fabric wouldn't come into contact with the preserve, then that could work as well. Yeah, Elizabeth just said you can leave the jar open slightly, but you should place a tray underneath so it, to catch the leaks. And it'll also smell up the room a bit. Yes, good point. Yeah, that's also a good point too. If you're willing, or if you're brewing multiple types of ferment, the silicone lids help reduce cross contamination of the various strains of bacteria. Yeah, that's very true. Cloth, not so antiseptic.
All right, I think we'll do a last call for questions now before we reach 3:59. And if there aren't any more questions, we'll wrap up just a little bit early.
Yeah, my basement also, or my house smelled pretty funky when I made kimchi. It was worth it though, I think. It depends what you put in. If it's just cabbage and salt, I would definitely say no. But if you're gonna put any sort of chilies or even carrots, I would try to avoid getting that on things. Linen though is pretty washable, I've found. I think it's more the synthetic fabrics that tend to hold on to stains. You could use red cabbage for sure. It would definitely stain. But yeah, you could definitely use red cabbage. You're welcome, Annette. I'm glad. You're welcome, everyone. To who's saying things in the chat. I'm glad everyone's excited to make sauerkraut and get fermenting. It's a really fun skill to have, and like it's something that's really buildable as well. Like there's so much to learn. Yeah.
So before everybody leaves, we do have a few other things, and we are going to do our prize draw for those who are still on the call. So make sure you stick around for a couple extra minutes here. And as Helga did put in the chat here, send us pictures if you're making some this evening or moving forward with your fermenting journey. We'd love to see those and share those as well on our social media. Any other questions before we move on? Say we're good. So just to wrap up, here. So for those of you who have been at previous workshops, you know that you'll get a follow-up email as well with this information. And I believe Anna will be putting these in the chat right now as well. But Lindsay is also sharing a few additional links and resources to the ones that Helga's been putting in the chat as well. So we do have a great fermentation videos for starting to learn more about fermenting and getting more into it. We also have fermented hot pepper sauce recipe that we'll be sharing, as well as comprehensive resource for learning about kombucha. So if you're looking to get more into that and we'll be sharing those. And for our prize draw today, we're pretty excited to have some local homemade pickles, relish, and preserves from Collison's Crafts and Sue's Preserves. For those of you who are in Prince George, you've likely seen them at the farmer's market if you've been down there, often with this large display of jams, preserves, relish, pickles. So for today, we do have our wheel to spin, and you do have to be in Prince George to get this one just because it is and food and everything, so we'll have to deliver it. And once we just end, we'll reach out in an email after this workshop to get your address and everything to get it to you. So for today, our winner is Charlie. Exciting. And I know this is actually your second prize win, so very exciting.
Yeah, thank you so much again. Thank you, of course.
Awesome. Very exciting. So yeah, we should still have your address in our email, so we can get
Thank
that
you
to
so much.
Great. And yeah, for those of you who have been on our calls, I know a few of you have won prizes before, a couple of you have also won a couple of them before. And for those of you who haven't won any, remember that for each workshop that you attend, you're also getting entered into our final prize draw, which is going to be a big batch of local goodies. There's a composter in there, beeswax wraps, and a lot of other things. So make sure you're sticking around till the end of our final workshop next week as well to see who wins that big draw. And just to finish off, stay in touch. We'd love to see your pictures of your sauerkraut, of your kombucha, sharing your story with us about fermenting and how you're reducing waste in your kitchen. You can find us on social media at Eco Living Kitchen on Facebook and Instagram, or at Eco Living Kitch on Twitter. And so yeah, tag us, comment on our posts as well to share what you've been up to. And as well, Anne will be putting in the chat a link to a feedback form. We have been collecting a lot of feedback over our workshop series that we've been using to kind of improve as we've been going along. And with this one being our 6th and second last, there's also a question in this feedback form about what you'd like to see from us next, or what sort of climate action you'd like to see in Prince George. So if there's something you're really keen to see happen here, but just haven't been able to get started with it, or are looking for more of a community to get started with it, make sure to drop that in there so that once this workshop series wraps up, we kind of have some more ideas about what we can do next to help out in our community. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you so much to Lindsay as well for being our presenter. I know I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. So thank you so much. Yeah, hope you all have a wonderful Saturday, and hope to see you as well next week at our final workshop.
Thanks, everyone.